So back last fall, my senior year, this original whole idea and topic of taking advantage of God's grace, it first came up to me from my friend Carter, and he brought it up to me because, we were both starting to get closer to God, and we both would still fall into temptation, or just fall into sin in general, and we kind of had our first Bible study together after he brought up this idea of taking advantage of God's grace, because he thinks that's kind of what I was doing in a way. Because I was at the idea like, he gave us over sins, I'm fine if I just sin. But it's like, it wasn't like that. And so we read Romans a little bit, and then the first few verses of Romans chapter 6, it says, "What shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? By no means. We are those who have died to sin. How can we live in it any longer?" So sin is what makes us dead, like spiritually, but we're alive to God in Jesus Christ because he died to forgive us for our sins. And the verse I said in the beginning of the video, it's repeated multiple times. And if you want to read about God's grace and learn more about it, I would read chapters 6 through 8 of Romans. I think it's very helpful. And then another thing, looking at sin, when you sin, sin is what separates you from God and your relationship from God. It just hurts it. So if you truly love God, why would you even want to be separated from him? This connects to Romans chapter 8, verse 5. "Those who live according to the flesh have their mind set on what the flesh desires, but those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires." And this lately has been a reminder for me, is since I've grown closer to God and my love for him is genuine, and I'm actually gaining so much progress with him, my mind has been set on what the Spirit desires and what I can do to glorify God. And this is instead what I used to be. I would be living according to the flesh in my past, having my mind set on all the worldly desires out there. It wasn't good for you. And if you ever have a question what is sin and what isn't, just ask yourself would this please God or would it glorify God? Also, what I've come to realize is now, since I'm walking in the Spirit, it's not me doing the sin and committing the sin, it's the sin living in me that's doing it. But if you're walking on the flesh and what the flesh desires, that's actually you doing the action. It's not just the sin living in you. This relates to taking advantage of God's grace, because if you're walking in what the flesh desires, that's hostile to God. And if you're hostile to God, you cannot please him. And that's likely where you're not able to truly receive his grace and his forgiveness. And that's not to scare anybody. What I did to kind of change my mindset and to walk in the Spirit was kind of repeat the idea, if you love God, you're not going to want to be separated from him. So that's why you need to walk in the Spirit and, run from sin. And just remember, it's a battle and you can still be forgiven regardless.